Before we get into today's program, I want to let you know, in case you didn't already know, that President Reagan's wife, Nancy Reagan, passed away on Sunday, March 6th. She was 94 years old, and she and President Reagan had an incredible marriage. I encourage you to read the book, if you have never done so, I Love You, Ronnie, the love letters of Ronald Reagan to Nancy Reagan. And I promise you, if you've got a sentimental part in your heart, you will weep. I have read the book, and I shed tears as I read it. The love letters that he wrote to her were just so amazing, so endearing, and showed a devotion and romance that they had with each other for decades. And also, it showed that he was incredibly articulate, incredibly intelligent. There's a lot of people who suggest that President Reagan was good at reading cue cards. When you read some of those letters, you'll see that he was really good at writing them. May God grant Mrs. Reagan the joy of life eternal, and we thank God again for President Reagan and for the good that he did to this country. Let's use President Reagan as a starting point as we go forward in today's program. Now, we have an awful lot that we have to cover, and we'll talk about it today and tomorrow. Tomorrow night, we have yet another primary with 4 states, all of them proportional states, up for grabs. And we'll talk more about those states tomorrow night. Perhaps a starting point for today's program would be the fact that in the year 1979 and 1980, when President Reagan was then candidate Reagan, when he was running, there was a hue and cry from the Republican establishment. They did not want him as the president. They wanted George Bush, the elder. They did not want Reagan. There were journalists at that time who were comparing Ronald Reagan, ready, to Adolf Hitler. On multiple occasions, whether they were allusions or direct comparisons, they compared Ronald Reagan, our beloved president, our beloved 40th president, they compared him to Adolf Hitler. Anyone with a knowledge, even a rudimentary knowledge of history, a basic knowledge of the facts, knows that such a comparison was ludicrous. Not that it is ludicrous, that at the very moment that those words were spoken, it showed an idiocy, a stupidity, a vulgar prejudice against Ronald Reagan and what he stood for, of the person who said the words. Ronald Reagan was not on trial. All right? I mean, to some degree he was. You have to look at his policies, look at what he's saying, and then decide if you want him to be president. But to compare him with the maniac, the dictator, the mass murderer, Adolf Hitler, was at the time patently absurd. And now, to my shock, actually I'm not that shocked, but to my disgust, Glen Beck, this man, many of you know who he is. He has a TV show, he has a radio show, he has a network called The Blaze. He was being interviewed over the weekend by George Stephanopoulos and whipped out this, held it up to the camera, a ballot showing that Adolf Hitler himself was in fact elected. That's right, in case you didn't know, Adolf Hitler was elected. The difference between Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler, I actually can't even believe that I'm saying this. I can't believe that I have to point it out, okay? But you know what? I'm not going to descend to that level, because basically what he's doing is mix and match. He's saying, look, Adolf Hitler was elected and he was a maniac. Well, read Mein Kampf, or portions of it, and you will see why Winston Churchill said that Hitler was a madman that had to be hemmed in and destroyed. I ask you, the viewer, all right, what has Donald Trump said that is Hitler-esque? was protecting our border like Hitler. It wasn't that he said, I hate Mexicans. He said, I want to protect our border. I love Mexicans. Let them come in. Hitler said he hated Jews. He blamed the Jews for the defeat of Germany in World War I. Hitler wanted gun control. He did not want the average German citizen to be able to have their own weaponry. Okay? Donald Trump says he protects the Second Amendment. Do I have to go down the list really and truly? It shows a lack of panic from Glen Beck and from others, but from Glen Beck in particular, and a level of intellectual dishonesty. Glen, you're a better man than this. At least I thought you were. Don't push the envelope of propriety. Don't push the envelope of truth. You can say that you don't like Donald Trump's policies on a temporary ban on Muslims. You can say you don't want to build a wall. You can say you don't want a trade war. There's a lot that you can say. But at the end of the day, don't lower yourself to this level intellectually because you don't sound like somebody who is well-read or who can connect the dots logically. And if you'd like to carry this discussion on in a public forum, I'd be happy to do so. Or we can respond show to show. But to compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler is ludicrous. And if you don't know it, then you've disqualified yourself from being a guiding light or a voice into the hearts of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, for those of you who think I'm being a little too hard on Glen Beck, listen to his words from a radio show last week.
If I were on the stage, I would have said, have you been listening to him tonight?
Right. Yeah, right.
Have you been listening to what I say about him?
And also, why would you be sitting
I
in
believe
someone's
these
shoes?
things.
How would you be
Oh,
sitting
man,
in
if I
them?
were close enough and I had a knife. Really, I mean,
Wait, what?
the stabbing just wouldn't stop.
Really? You're talking about stabbing repeatedly Donald Trump? That shows something coming unhinged internally, Glenn. It shows something coming unhinged internally. And you need to calm down. You might need to sit down with someone and talk.